The snow had come down on Karev Station for 3 days before the Veth arrived. It came the way it always came. No warning, no radio signal, no polite knock on the outer hull. Just a shadow that swallowed the sun, and then the docking clamps firing like rifle shots, and then the lights going out across the entire civilian ring, while the emergency reds bled through the corridors in long, arterial stripes. Merk was 14 years old when it happened. He'd been in the maintenance shaft behind Recycler Bay 7, doing exactly what his Uncle Dav had told him not to do, which was rewiring the secondary coolant bypass to squeeze another 4% efficiency out of a system already running at 118% of its rated load. He had a length of copper braid in his teeth, and a thermal probe in his right hand, and a half-eaten protein block in his left, when the docking clamps went off and the lights died. He lay still in the dark for a moment. Then he finished the splice. He was like that Merk. He completed things. It was a quality that people who liked him called determination, and people who didn't called stubbornness, and the distinction mostly depended on whether the thing he was completing was something they'd wanted done. He crawled out of the shaft to find the station already changed. Veth soldiers stood at every intersection, tall, pale things in black resin armor that curved around their bodies like a second skeleton. Their heads were narrow, triangular, with the flat sensor clusters that passed for eyes set wide and unblinking. They carried stasis rods in 3-fingered hands. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their mere presence was a language, and it said, "Stop, stand, comply, or cease to exist." Merk stopped, he stood. He complied, at least outwardly. He watched. He counted 12 soldiers in his quadrant alone, moving with the coordinated efficiency of something that had done this thousands of times before. He watched them catalog the human population of Karev Station the same way he cataloged a wiring diagram, methodically, without sentiment, looking for what was useful and what was waste. Karev Station held 412 humans. About half were families of miners working the asteroid clusters in the belt below. The rest were support staff, traders, and 4 representatives of something called the Interplanetary Cooperative Authority, which was a very long name for an organization whose primary function, as far as Merk had ever been able to tell, was holding meetings about what it would do if the Veth ever arrived. The Veth had now arrived. The ICA representatives were the first to be separated out. They put everyone in the cargo bays. The largest one, Bay 12, held 260 people sitting or standing in the orange glow of the portable lights the Veth had set up around the perimeter. The air smelled of machine oil and fear. Children were being kept quiet by exhausted parents. A few of the older miners were trading looks, calculating looks, the kind that men who spend their lives gauging rock stress and tunnel stability develop as a professional habit. Merk sat with his back against a cargo container and watched a man he did not know fall apart. The man's name, Merk would later learn, was Sergeant Heikki Oravainen, ex-Colonial Defense Force, 13 years of service, retired on medical grounds 18 months ago after something happened to his knee on Proxima Station that he never talked about directly but mentioned obliquely whenever he drank, which was often. He was a big man, broad across the chest, with the kind of physical presence that made rooms quieter when he entered them. He was sitting 10 meters away, and he was shaking. Not visibly, not in a way most people would notice, but Merk noticed everything. It was the hands. Oravainen's hands were pressed flat on his thighs, and he was pressing them down with deliberate force, trying to hold them still, and they were shaking anyway. A fine, rapid tremor that hadn't stopped since the soldiers had walked them in at gunpoint. He was not a coward. Merk understood that instinctively. A coward didn't fight the shaking. A coward gave into it, let it become something louder, used it to justify whatever came next. Oravainen was fighting it with everything he had. But the shaking was winning. When the Veth officer came in, taller than the soldiers, its armor marked with deep-etched geometry that pulsed faintly in the low light. Oravainen looked up and something left his face. Not courage, not dignity, just the particular human quality that allows you to hold a line when everything around you is dissolving. The officer spoke in Standard. The Veth had learned human languages 100 years ago and had not bothered to update their pronunciation since, which meant every word came out slightly flattened, as though the language had been pressed between heavy stones. Compliance is optimal. Resistance produces only one outcome. You are assets of the Veth Imperium pending registration. You will be processed in groups. Non-compliance during processing will result in immediate reclassification. Everyone knew what reclassification meant. Oravainen's hands pressed harder against his thighs. When the soldiers began separating out the first group, the ICA representatives, 3 station engineers, and 2 of the senior miners, Oravainen was among them. Not because he had been targeted, because when the soldier pointed at the general area where he sat, Oravainen stood up before anyone else did. He looked at Merk as he stood. Merk looked back. Something passed between them that Merk did not have a word for at 14, but would spend the rest of his life trying to name. It was not an apology. It was not a plea. It was more like a man recognizing that what he was about to do was a specific kind of wrong and acknowledging it to the only witness available, because the acknowledgement was the only thing left he could do. Then Oravainen walked toward the soldiers, and one of the station engineers saw where he was going and fell in beside him, and the soldiers sorted them into the group, and they were taken out. They were not brought back. On the second day, Merk was taken to a different room. It was smaller, cleaner, lit by the cold white light that the Veth seemed to prefer. There was a table that wasn't quite right, too low, the proportions slightly off, designed for something that sat differently than a human sat. Merk stood in front of it because there was nowhere to sit that made physical sense for him. The being behind the table was not a standard Veth soldier. It wore no armor. Its skin was the pale gray-white of deep space organisms that had never seen a sun, pulled tight over a frame that was almost but not quite human in its proportions. The shoulders too wide, the neck too long, the fingers too numerous and too precise in their movements. It had something in front of it, a data surface. On the data surface was information about Merk. More information than Merk had thought existed about Merk. You modified the recycler bypass on level 7, it said, not a question. Merk said nothing. The modification improved thermal efficiency by 4.2%. This is above the theoretical limit for the hardware configuration. A pause. You are 14 years old. The theoretical limit was calculated wrong, Merk said. The being looked at him for a long time with its flat sensor clusters. Your designation is Merk Salka. Father, deceased, mining accident 7 years ago. Mother, registered as living, employment record shows she has been working double-shift cycles in the processing ring since the accident. No formal technical training. Self-educated from station maintenance manuals, salvage from decommissioned equipment, and, another pause, 6 stolen data cubes from the engineering library. I was going to return them, Merk said. That is not relevant. The being leaned forward slightly. What is relevant is this. In approximately 4 standard hours, you and the remaining station population will be formally inducted into Veth labor protocols. You will be assigned to a work unit based on your physical and cognitive assessment scores. This assignment will be permanent. It paused again. Its pauses had a quality of weight, as though silence was a tool it used with the same precision as language. Your scores suggest an engineering track. It is a survivable assignment. It is one of the better ones available. Merk said nothing. I am telling you this, the being said, because it is efficient for you to understand your situation accurately. You have options that others do not. This is not sentiment. It is logistics. What happened to the people they took yesterday? Merrick asked. The silence that followed was a different kind. They were reclassified, the being said finally. Merrick looked at the table that wasn't quite right for him. He looked at the data surface with all its information about him. He looked at the being across from him with its flat, unblinking sensor clusters, and its too many fingers and its perfectly calibrated pauses. "My name is Merrick Salka," he said. "I am 14 years old. My father was a miner. My mother works double shifts. I learned engineering from stolen data cubes." He let that sit for a moment. "I want you to know that, whatever you're going to put in that file about me, I want the correct name in it." Something shifted in the being's posture, barely perceptible, the equivalent, maybe, of a man sitting back. "Noted," it said. They took him back to Bay 12. On the third day, the Emperor's ship arrived. Even by Veth standards, it was enormous, a vessel that didn't dock so much as absorb the station, extending docking arms along the full circumference of the civilian ring so that Karev became, effectively, a tumor on its side. The ship's arrival changed the atmosphere in Bay 12 immediately and completely. The soldiers, who had maintained a precise and uniform efficiency since the occupation began, became sharper, more alert. They stood differently. Their stasis rods were held at a different angle. This was the Veth equivalent of nervousness. It was the first time Merrick had seen anything like an emotion from them, and he catalogued it the way he catalogued everything. They were brought before the Emperor in the ship's central chamber. The chamber was designed for this. Merrick recognized the architecture immediately. The tiered floor, the elevated platform, the sight lines arranged so that whatever stood at the center of the platform could be seen clearly from every point in the room. It was a stage. An ancient human instinct recognized it as such, the same instinct that recognized fire and teeth and the sound of something very large moving through undergrowth. The Emperor was at the center of it. Veth came in many forms. Merrick had seen enough in 3 days to understand this. But the Emperor was a different order of the same language. It was vast, even seated, its armor not the functional black of the soldiers but something deeper, a material that seemed to absorb light and return it changed. It had attendants arrayed in a semicircle behind it, each one holding something. Instruments, perhaps, or weapons. The distinction with the Veth was often cosmetic. 260 humans stood in a ragged cluster in the center of the chamber. The Emperor looked at them the way a surveyor looks at a terrain feature, with professional interest, devoid of malice, which was somehow more frightening than malice would have been. It spoke. The translation came through small devices the soldiers had distributed, earpieces, crude things but functional. "You are the population of Karev Station. Your station is now incorporated into the Veth Imperium. Your productive capacity has been assessed. The majority of you will be useful, some will not." A pause. "I am told that among you there are individuals of notable technical capability. I am further told that one of these is a child. This interests me." A murmur ran through the crowd. Merrick stood still. One of the soldiers walked toward him. He stepped forward before it reached him. He was aware of everyone watching. He was aware of his mother somewhere in that crowd. He hadn't seen her face yet. The crowd was too thick, but he knew she was there because she was always there, had always been there, had worked double shifts for 7 years to keep them both alive in a station that didn't make it easy to be alive. He was aware of 259 people whose survival probability had just become partially linked to what he did in the next few minutes. He was 14 years old, and his hands were steady. He walked to the front of the crowd and stood in the space the soldier had cleared. The Emperor looked at him for a long time. "You modified a thermal recycler," it said. "The modification exceeded theoretical parameters for the hardware." "The theoretical parameters were wrong," Merrick said. Silence then. "How old are you?" 14 standard years. "And you believe you can identify errors in Veth engineering assessments?" It was not a question. Merrick answered it anyway. I believe I identified an error in that one, he said. Whether it was a Veth assessment, I couldn't say. The recycler's original design specs read like human colonial authority work to me. The efficiency ceiling in the documentation was a copy-paste from an older model that ran on a different coolant mix. Someone didn't update it. The hardware could always do better than the spec said. A very long silence. Show me, the Emperor said. There was 1 hour between the Emperor's initial address and when they came from Merrick. In that hour, he learned what had happened to the people taken on the second day. He learned it from a woman named Petra Castle, who had a face like stone that had been weathered by something much harder than stone, and who had been in the processing line adjacent to Oravinen's group before they'd been separated out. She was short, precise in her movements, and she had the particular quality of composure that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from the decision to hold it in place through applied force. They were taken to the ship early, she said. She was speaking quietly, turned slightly away, the Veth soldier at the nearest checkpoint visible at the edge of her peripheral vision. Not here, to the forward docking bay. I saw through the access corridor window. They were, she paused, not from grief, from precision, getting the description right. They walked, all of them. The soldier who'd been shaking, the big one with the bad knee, he walked at the front. He wasn't shaking anymore. Merrick processed this. Were they? He started. I don't know. I lost sight of them past the forward junction. She looked at him directly. Why are you asking? Because I'm trying to understand what kind of decision he made, Merrick said. Whether it helped. Petra Castle looked at him for a long moment. She was perhaps 45, perhaps 50. She had the hands of someone who did precise work, the kind of hands his mother had, the kind that knew the difference between force and pressure. It didn't help them, she said, but I think it helped him. He stopped shaking. A pause. Sometimes that's the only kind of help available. Merrick thought about this for a long time. When the Veth escort came for him 20 minutes later, he remembered Oravinen's hands, pressing flat, pressing hard, trying to hold something still that wouldn't be held. He thought about the way Oravinen had looked at him before standing up, that look that wasn't an apology and wasn't a plea and lived somewhere in the difficult space between them. He thought, I am going to do this differently. He thought, I am going to be cold and slow and pay attention. He thought, I am not going to stop shaking by giving anything away. What followed was 2 hours that Merrick spent at a technical interface the Veth set up in the chamber. Not the data surfaces the interrogator had used, something more complex, with haptic input layers that responded to his hands, even though they'd been designed for a different kind of hand. He worked around the interface the way he worked around every piece of equipment that wasn't made for him, finding the logic under the design, learning its assumptions, and then ignoring the ones that didn't apply. He showed the Emperor the recycler error. Then he showed it 3 others he'd found in Karev Station systems during 18 months of living in its maintenance shafts. Then, because he couldn't help it, he showed it something that wasn't an error, a place in the station's thermal routing where the architecture could be fundamentally rethought, not fixed but rebuilt from a different premise. And if you rebuilt it from that premise, the efficiency gain wasn't 4%. It was 42. He showed it this and then looked up. The Emperor was watching him with an attention that was qualitatively different from how it had watched anything else in this room. Around the chamber, the soldiers had gone very still. You are 14 years old, the Emperor said again, not to Merrick, to itself or to its attendants or to the general fact of the universe, the way you'd say a thing you couldn't quite integrate. Yes, Merrick said. And your formal education. I don't have formal education. Another silence. I have seen Veth engineers of 40 cycles who could not have found what you just showed me, the Emperor said. And the thing you have just shown me, the reconstruction of the thermal architecture, this is not a discovery. You invented it. I was bored, Merrick said. Something happened in the room. Merck couldn't name it exactly. It was as though a frequency had changed, something below audible, felt in the chest rather than heard. The attendants shifted. The soldiers who had not moved in 2 hours moved, not dramatically, just the particular micro-adjustment of creatures recalibrating. The Emperor leaned forward. "I will offer you a position," it said. "Not labor, not assignment, a position. In my household as a technical analyst. It is a distinction that no human has ever been offered." A pause. "It will preserve you. It will preserve those closest to you. Your usefulness will be the instrument of your survival." Merck looked at the interface. He looked at the work he'd just done. The beautiful, honest work of finding what was actually true about a system, regardless of what anyone had assumed about it. He thought about Orvinen's hands pressing flat against his thighs. He thought about the 259 people behind him. He said, "What about them?" The Emperor paused. It was a different quality of pause from the interrogators, less calculated, more genuine. It was the pause of something that had not been asked that question in a very long time. "What about them?" it repeated. "The people behind me, the station population. What happens to them if I accept your position?" "They proceed under standard labor protocols." "Which is what Orvinen got," Merck said. "The man from yesterday." "The ex-soldier." "That name is not in my information." "He was the first one to stand up when your soldier pointed. Big man, dark hair, bad knee. He was trying to protect the people around him by making himself the target first." Merck paused. He calculated wrong. He thought compliance would help them. He was wrong, but his calculation came from the right place. The Emperor looked at him. "You are asking me," it said slowly, "to negotiate the terms of your compliance." "I'm asking what you want from me," Merck said. "You want my engineering capability. That's the offer. So I want to know what the full exchange is. Not just what you're offering me. What the exchange is." The attendants were very still. "You are a child," the Emperor said. "You already know that," Merck said. "You said it twice. I think you keep saying it because you're not sure what to do with the answer." What the Emperor did next would be discussed in Veth political circles for decades afterward, though the humans of Karev Station only learned of this much later, from historians who picked through the records of the Imperium's administrative archives after things changed. What the records showed was that the Emperor Svelkarath, whose title translated roughly as Sovereign of the Third and Fourth Expanses, spent 11 minutes in consultation with its chief advisors before returning to the chamber and doing something it had never done in 40 years of reign. It entertained a counteroffer from a captive. "The population of this station," Svelkarath said, "is not negotiable in the conventional sense. They have been assessed. Their assignments exist. I cannot unmake this." "I understand," Merck said. "What I can offer is contingency reclassification. If their assigned roles are fulfilled to standard, advancement through labor tracks becomes possible. In theory, it rarely occurs in practice." "Why rarely?" "Because the humans assigned to those tracks rarely have anyone capable of teaching them to fulfill the roles well." Merck looked at the Emperor. "I'll teach them," he said. "If you give me access to the people from this station, I'll teach them to fulfill their roles well enough that they qualify for advancement. That's what I want. Access to them. Regular access. As part of whatever position you're offering me." Silence. "You would trade your exceptional capability," the Emperor said, "to spend part of your time teaching maintenance workers." "I'd trade it to keep 259 people alive," Merck said. "The teaching is just the mechanism." Another long pause. "And in exchange," the Emperor said, "you will give me your full capability. No withholding. No deliberate degradation of your work. Complete technical honesty." "Complete technical honesty," Merck agreed. "That's the only kind I know how to do." Something happened in the Emperor's posture, something that in a human you might have called respect if you were being generous, or assessment if you were being precise. Maybe with Veth there was no difference. There is, the Emperor said, one further condition, a test. It leaned forward. A demonstration of the claim you are making, that your capability is real, that this is not a child's performance of confidence. What kind of test? The Emperor paused. This ship, it said, carries a specimen, a creature from the Keth expanse, the deep rim worlds. It was captured by my predecessor. No Veth handler has successfully maintained control of it since its capture. It has killed 4 experienced handlers and injured 9 others. We keep it because its biology is of research interest. We cannot study it effectively because no one can get close to it. Svelkareth looked at Merk with the flat, unblinking sensors that passed for eyes. My advisors find the situation embarrassing. They have suggested terminating the specimen. Merk waited. I will offer you, the Emperor said, a different arrangement. If you can approach the creature without triggering an attack, if you can remain in its presence for 5 minutes without injury, I will accept your counteroffer in full. The station population will receive the contingency reclassification. You will have your access. It paused. If you cannot, the original terms apply. You alone receive the position. The population proceeds under standard protocol. And if the creature kills me, Merk said. Then we will find another technical analyst, the Emperor said, eventually. A murmur ran through the assembled humans. Merk heard his mother's voice somewhere in it, a single, sharp intake of breath that he recognized the way he recognized the sound of the recycler when it was running wrong. He did not look back. What do you know about the creature? He asked. Its designation in our taxonomy is Verathkethul, apex predator, bilateral symmetry, hexapodal, 3 primary sensory clusters, prey detection primarily olfactory and thermal. It is, by any measure, one of the most dangerous organisms in the catalogued galaxy. Olfactory and thermal, Merk said. Correct. What is the temperature of the holding chamber? A pause, standard maintenance temperature. Approximately 17 degrees by human measurement. And before my father died, Merk said, more to himself than to the Emperor, he used to say that the coldest thing in the universe is a mine shaft that's been sealed for 3 days. He was quiet for a moment, turning something over. What does it eat? In the wild. The Emperor made a gesture to an attendant. In the wild, based on observation of its capture site, it appears to pursue prey primarily by body heat signature. It attacks things that are warm. Merk nodded slowly. I need 20 minutes, he said, and I need access to the maintenance section of this ship, the thermal regulation system specifically. The Emperor looked at him. You are going to modify your body temperature, it said. I'm going to modify the ambient temperature of the path from here to the holding chamber, Merk said. And then yes, as much as I can manage without passing out. That will not be sufficient. The creature will still detect you. Eventually, Merk agreed. But olfactory and thermal are primary sensory clusters, not exclusive ones. Bilateral symmetry at that size, hexapodal movement pattern, that's an ambush predator profile, not a pursuit profile. It attacks things that trigger its targeting system. If I approach slowly enough and cold enough, I give it time to run other sensory patterns. Bilateral visual, acoustic, secondary analysis systems. He paused. It's been in that chamber for how long? Approximately 11 standard years. And it's been in an environment with no prey, no hunt, and no successful kills for 11 years. Its threat response is probably hair trigger. Everything warm that comes close enough gets the kill attempt because that's the only interaction it's had with the outside world. But that means it's learned nothing new. Its behavioral repertoire is frozen at capture. He stopped. I'm going to give it something new to analyze, something that doesn't fit its existing patterns. I need time for that to happen. The Emperor was looking at him, the way the interrogator had looked at him. That quality of attention that was not quite calculation and not quite wonder, but lived in the space between them. 20 minutes, it said, and a technical escort. They brought him back to Bay 12, while the terms were being formalized. He sat against the same cargo container, the same orange light, the same smell of machine oil and fear, though the fear had a slightly different quality now, not the spiked, immediate fear of the first day, but the duller, more sustainable fear of people who had been frightened for long enough that the fear had become a kind of whether they lived inside. Petra Castle sat down beside him without asking. For a while neither of them said anything. They told us, she said finally, the reclassification, the contingency track. She was looking at the floor. They said the terms were negotiated. Yes. By you. Yes. She was quiet. Around them, the population of Karev Station sat and stood and spoke in low voices. Children asleep in parents' arms. The older miners still trading their calculating looks. Everyone existing in the suspension of people who did not yet know what tomorrow held and were trying to hold themselves ready for all possible versions of it. What do you have to do? Petra Castle asked. Merck told her. He was precise about it, the thermal modification, the approach, the 5 minutes. He did not dramatize it. There was no need to. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You're not afraid, she said. I'm afraid, he said. I'm just clearer about what I'm afraid of than I usually am. I'm afraid I've made an error in the behavioral assessment. I'm afraid my thermal modification won't be sufficient. I'm afraid the animal has been in that chamber so long that what I'm calling curiosity is actually something that doesn't exist anymore. That 11 years with no outlet has compressed everything into a single state. He paused. I'm afraid I'm wrong. But you're going anyway. I'm going anyway. She looked at him sideways. She had the particular quality of observation that came from years of having to make fast, accurate assessments of people. The quality of someone who had supervised or managed or led, who had learned to read the difference between confident and certain, between brave and reckless. You remind me of someone, she said. Who? My daughter, a pause, she's 9. She does the same thing, holds very still when she's afraid, doesn't let it show from the outside but doesn't pretend it isn't there either. She was quiet. I haven't seen her in 3 months. She's on Callisto Station with her grandparents. Merck thought about this. About a 9-year-old on Callisto Station who held very still when she was afraid. She sounds like she'll be fine, he said. I think so too, Petra Castle said. That's what I tell myself. There was a long silence. If it goes wrong tomorrow, Merck said. Not a complete sentence, a fragment, the beginning of something he didn't know how to finish. It won't, Petra Castle said. But if... It won't. She said it with the finality of someone who had decided not to live inside that particular possibility. You've done your assessment. The thermal modification is correct. The behavioral analysis is sound. She looked at him. You found an error in their engineering documentation at 14 years old. You told the Emperor of the Third Expanse your name. You are going to go into that chamber and come back out. She paused. The alternative does not serve the math. Merck looked at her. That's not how probability works, he said. I know that, she said. I don't care. He didn't say anything. Go to sleep, she said. You have a long day tomorrow. He leaned back against the cargo container. He did not sleep, not really, but he rested. The close, watchful resting of someone whose mind does not entirely stop, but has learned to idle, to turn problems over slowly instead of urgently. He thought about thermal dynamics. He thought about apex predators and the 11-year compression of behavioral repertoire. He thought about his father humming at the breakfast table, not thinking about it. The melody just being there in him the way things are there in you when they were put in by someone you loved. He thought, I am going to carry this into the room. He thought it will be enough. He thought it has to be enough. Across the bay, someone's child was crying softly, and its parent was shushing it with a low, rhythmic sound. Not words, just the sound. The old biological signal that said, "You are not alone, I am here. The thing that is frightening is not as large as it seems." Merrick listened to it until the emergency lights dimmed further and Bay 12 settled into its low, nocturnal state. 259 people breathing in the dark of a ship that was not theirs, in the space between one kind of life and whatever came next. The maintenance corridors of the Emperor's ship were not built for humans. Merrick worked in them the way he worked in all spaces not built for him, by ignoring the ways they didn't fit and concentrating on the ways they did. The Veth thermal regulation system was elegant. He cataloged it automatically, the way he cataloged everything. Primary coolant loops running along the main structural members, secondary distribution through the wall cavities, tertiary regulation via surface material that could shift its thermal emissivity in response to the primary loop pressure. It was a better system than anything on Karev Station. He modified it anyway. The technical escort, a Veth engineer of some kind, not a soldier, with instruments instead of weapons, watched him with the same quality of absorbed professional attention that Merrick imagined he gave to unusual wiring configurations. This modification will lower the ambient temperature of corridor 7 through 12 by approximately 9 degrees, the engineer said. 11, Merrick said. You're not accounting for the secondary emissivity change. The engineer looked at the work, looked again. 11, it agreed. When it was done, Merrick stood in the modified corridor for 7 minutes with his arms at his sides and his breathing slow, and his mind turning through the problem the way it turned through all problems, looking for what was actually true, independent of what he'd been told to expect. His core temperature dropped by 2 degrees, maybe 2.5, not enough really, but enough to change the signature. Then he walked to the holding chamber. The chamber was large, larger than he'd expected, 30 meters across, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow, the floor a gray composite material marked with long parallel gouges that told their own story. The light was low and diffuse, the kind of lighting that didn't favor any particular visual spectrum. The creature was at the far end. It was beautiful. Merrick had enough of his father in him to be unable to look at a thing that had been created by 4 billion years of relentless pressure and selection, and see it as anything other than what it was, a solution, an answer to a specific problem. The problem in this case was, how do you survive in an environment where everything is trying to kill you? And the answer was, become the thing that is better at killing than everything else. The Verath Kethul was approximately 4 meters at the shoulder. Its 6 limbs moved with a liquid economy that made the transition between stillness and motion almost invisible. There wasn't a wind-up, a preparation, a telegraphing of intent. It was simply still, and then it was not still, and the not stillness was faster than seemed reasonable for something of its mass. It had turned to face him. Merrick stopped walking. He stood, arms at his sides, hands open. He breathed slowly. He was cold, genuinely cold, the 11-degree drop doing its work, and he focused on staying cold, on slowing his circulation, on presenting the smallest possible thermal signature he could manage without losing consciousness. The creature looked at him. Its 3 sensory clusters rotated slightly, not independently together, a synchronized movement that reminded him of a telescope array he'd seen once in a salvage manifest, multiple apertures combining to resolve a single image. It was analyzing him. He let it analyze. He did not move. 20 seconds, 40, a minute. The creature took 1 step forward, not a hunting step, not the coiled, loaded movement of an animal about to strike. A different kind of step, the step of something that was curious and was not entirely sure what to do about being curious. Merk thought about his father. He thought about the last time he'd seen his father, which was in the morning before the shift that killed him. His father had been eating at the small table in their quarters, and he'd been singing something quietly, not a real song, just the kind of thing you hum when you're not thinking about it, a fragment of melody that had no origin and no end. When he'd noticed Merk watching him, he'd stopped, and then started again, because stopping it would have been stranger. Merk hummed the fragment now. It was quiet, barely audible, but the chamber had a particular acoustic quality. Those parallel gouges in the floor suggested the composite was harder than it looked, less absorptive, and the sound traveled. The creature stopped. Its sensory clusters moved again. Differently this time, less like analysis, more like attention. The distinction was subtle but real. Analysis was systematic. Attention was selective. It was listening to a specific thing. Merk kept humming. He started walking again, slowly, one step every few seconds, cold and slow and steady, humming a fragment of a song his dead father used to hum at breakfast. The creature watched him come. At 10 meters, it lowered its head. Not submissively. He didn't read it as submission. More like the way a cat lowers its head when it's watching something closely, bringing its primary sensors to a more favorable angle. It was looking at him very carefully. At 7 meters, it made a sound. The sound was unlike anything Merk had heard. Low, complex, with overtones that he felt in his sternum rather than heard with his ears. It was not aggressive. He was fairly sure it was not aggressive. He was not certain, and the uncertainty had a physical quality, a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold, but he kept walking. At 5 meters he stopped. They looked at each other. The creature's breath was visible in the cold air, plumes of vapor that rolled upward and dissipated. So was Merk's. He watched the creature watch his breath. He watched it process this information. A warm thing, breathing, humming, walking slowly, not running, not attacking, not triggering any of the patterns it had learned to associate with prey or threat. Something new. 5 minutes was a long time. Merk had been in the chamber for approximately 4 of them. He spent the 5th one standing very still, humming very quietly, watching the creature breathe. When the Veth escort entered the chamber at the far end, the creature turned sharply toward the new arrival, a flash of the old reflex, the immediate threat response, and Merk said quietly without thinking, "It's okay." The creature looked back at him. It was a strange moment. He had spoken to it as though it could understand him. It could not understand him. He had no reason to believe it could understand him. But the sound of his voice, the same voice that had been humming, seemed to register as continuous with the humming, as a signal from the same source, and the source had not heard it, and so the creature held. The escort stopped at the far end. 5 minutes, it said. Merk looked at the creature one more time. "I'll come back," he said. He did not know if that was true. He did not know if the Emperor would allow it, or if the deal he'd made would actually hold, or what the next hours would bring for 259 people whose names he mostly didn't know. He did not know anything with certainty, except the fragment of melody his father used to hum, and the fact that the theoretical parameters had been wrong, and the system could always do better than the spec said. He turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, the creature made the low, complex sound again. He walked back through the modified corridor. The Veth engineer fell in beside him. They walked in silence for a moment. The engineer was not a soldier. Merk had cataloged that much. It moved differently, carried itself differently, held its instruments with the particular careful possessiveness of someone whose primary relationship with the world was through measurement. It was, he thought, something like a scientist, something like what he might have been in a different life if the circumstances had been different. The modification to the coolant loop, the engineer said, the tertiary emissivity shift. You understood the system faster than most of our level 3 analysts. Merck said nothing. I am not being. The engineer paused, apparently looking for a word. Complimentary, I am noting an observation. I know, Merck said. I'm just thinking about something else. They walked another few steps. The creature, the engineer said. You believe it is curious. I think it might be, I'm not sure. The behavioral profile fits. No one has assessed it that way before. What assessment did they use? Threat profile, attack patterns, containment optimization. A pause. Those were the categories available. Merck thought about that. The categories available. How much of what you could see was shaped by the categories you had for seeing it? What's its life expectancy? He asked. Unknown. The species has a very short record in our taxonomy. The specimen was captured young, about a decade of age by rough biological assessment. In the wild, based on ecosystem modeling, these organisms may live 70 to 100 standard years. So it's still young, Merck said. By that estimate. 11 years in a chamber, Merck said. Still young, no hunt, no successful kills, no behavioral development. He was quiet. That's not just confinement, that's, he stopped himself. He didn't have the right to say what it was, not yet. But he thought, that is a kind of Oravinen. That is something that started shaking a long time ago and has been pressing its hands flat against its thighs ever since. He filed this thought away. The Emperor was waiting. Not in the central chamber, in a smaller room with fewer attendants, the kind of arrangement that felt, to Merck, like a deliberate reduction of formality. He was not sure if the Veth had formality in the human sense, but the reduction felt intentional regardless. 5 minutes, the Emperor said. 5 minutes, Merck agreed. No handler has lasted 40 seconds. I believe you. How did you? The Emperor paused in a way that seemed different from its previous pauses, less controlled. The thermal approach, that was sound, but it was not sufficient by itself to prevent an attack. No, Merck said. What was? Merck thought about this. I don't know exactly, he said. I think it hasn't encountered anything genuinely new in 11 years. Everything in that chamber is already categorized, already known. I came in cold and slow, and I came in making a sound it hadn't heard before, and I think that triggered whatever passes for curiosity in that animal, and curiosity and aggression are not the same state. He paused. That's a guess. It's an educated guess, but it's still a guess. The Emperor was looking at him. You are aware, it said, that my advisors will argue against the arrangement we discussed. They will say that offering contingency reclassification to 400 humans based on the performance of a single 14-year-old is an inefficient allocation of administrative resources. I imagine they will, Merck said. They will also say that the precedent is dangerous, that other captive populations may attempt to negotiate. That's probably true too. And you have nothing to say to these arguments. Merck was quiet for a moment. He thought about the room where the interrogator had shown him all the information it had gathered about him. The data surface with its precise, collected catalog. He thought about what was missing from that catalog, what couldn't be measured and filed. Ask me my name, he said. The Emperor paused. What? Your records have a designation for me. Ask me my name. A long silence. Then, with the slightly flattened quality of a language pressed between heavy stones, what is your name? Merck Salka, he said. I was born on Karev Station 14 years ago. My father was a miner named Alexei Salka who died in a tunnel collapse when I was 7, and who used to hum fragments of songs at the breakfast table. My mother is named Irina Salka, and she has worked double shifts for 7 years without complaining once in a way that she thought I could hear. I have no formal education. I have 6 stolen data cubes from the engineering library. I have spent 4 years in the maintenance shafts of a station that was falling apart because it couldn't afford proper repairs, learning to fix things that the official documentation said couldn't be fixed. He paused. I went into a chamber with a creature that killed 4 of your experienced handlers, and I came out in 5 minutes without a scratch, because I paid attention to what the animal actually was instead of what I was told to expect. He looked at the Emperor steadily. I am not an asset. I am not a resource. I am not a technical designation. I am Merk Salka, and I am telling you that I can do what I said I can do, and I am asking you to honor the arrangement we agreed to because I held my end of it. A pause. And because it is the right thing to do. Whatever right means in your language. The attendants were very still. The Emperor looked at him with its flat sensor clusters. In later years, when historians picked through the administrative records of the Veth Imperium trying to understand what had happened in this room, they would find a notation in the Emperor Svelkareth's personal archive, not an official document, not a record of proceedings, but something that seemed to be a private notation made in the hours after this meeting. The notation, in Veth, translated approximately as, "The human child named itself." It named itself in full, with its origins and its dead and its debts and its capability. I have not seen this before in a captive. I am not certain I have seen it before in anyone. The notation ended there. I have a name, he said, Merk Salka. I was born on Karev Station. My father was a miner. My mother works double shifts. I learned engineering from stolen data cubes. He looked at the Emperor. I went into that chamber with an animal that has killed 4 of your handlers, and I came out without a scratch because I paid attention to what the animal actually was instead of what I was afraid of it being. He paused. I will spend every day of whatever position you give me doing the same thing with every system I touch. I will find what is actually true, and I will tell you, and sometimes what is actually true will be inconvenient, and I will tell you that too. He let that settle. I want 259 people to have a chance to survive. I will earn that chance. That is what I'm offering you. The silence in the room was long. Then the Emperor made a gesture, a small one, directed at one of the attendants who moved to a secondary console. The contingency reclassification, the Emperor said, will be processed. Merk breathed. It was not relief exactly. It was the particular satisfaction of a correctly completed circuit, current flowing where it should, resistance managed, the system doing what the math said it could do once the wrong assumptions were removed. I have one more question, the Emperor said. Yes. The melody, what you were humming in the chamber, a pause, what was it? Merk thought about his father at the small table, the fragment with no origin and no end. I don't know, he said. My father used to hum it. I never asked him where it came from. He is deceased. Yes. The Emperor was quiet. I have read, it said finally, that humans frequently carry the behaviors of their dead, continue them, as a form of, it paused as though searching for the correct word from a language not its own. Persistence. That's one word for it, Merk said. My people do not do this. When we lose someone, the behaviors cease. We consider carrying the dead's patterns to be inefficient. Merk looked at the Emperor of the 3rd and 4th expanses, the vast, armored, cold-certain ruler of a civilization that had crossed the dark between stars and found 400 humans in a cargo bay and considered them an asset to be processed. Maybe that's why your handlers couldn't get close to the creature, he said quietly. They were only carrying their own knowledge. I was carrying my father's. The Emperor looked at him for a long time. Go, it said. Your people will be informed of the reclassification within the hour. Merk turned to leave. Salka, the Emperor said. He stopped. The melody, hum it again. He did not understand why. He did not need to understand why. He stood in the room of the most powerful being he had ever encountered, and he hummed the fragment his father had hummed. No beginning, no end, just the middle part that persisted. And the Emperor of the 3rd and 4th expanses sat very still and listened to it with the quality of attention that was not analysis but something else. Something that in a human you might have called longing. Then Merk walked out. His mother found him in the corridor outside Bay 12. She did not say anything. She was a woman who had spent 7 years not saying things, not saying how hard the double shifts were, not saying how much she missed his father, not saying what she was afraid of at 3 in the morning when the recyclers were loud, and the station walls were the only thing between 400 people and the void. She had said all of those things in other ways, in the double shifts themselves, in the food on the table, in the way she checked his hands when he came in from the maintenance shafts to make sure nothing was burned or cut. She checked his hands now. Nothing burned or cut. She held them for a moment. Then she let go. "They're letting us through to the labor track processing," she said. "With reclassification eligibility, someone negotiated it." She looked at him. "Was it you?" "I modified a thermal system," he said, "and I met an animal. Merk. And I told someone my name." She looked at him for a long time, really looked at him, the way she used to look at him when he was younger, and had done something she hadn't expected, and she was trying to determine whether to be frightened or proud. She had always landed on proud. She did now. She put one hand on the back of his neck, a gesture she'd used since he was small, gentle, and specific, the way you handle something that matters, and they walked together toward the processing hall, through the corridors of the Emperor's ship, toward whatever came next. Behind them, somewhere in the deep interior of the vessel, something made a low, complex sound. Not aggressive. Something new. In the hallway outside the smaller room, one of the Emperor's attendants stopped him. It was not a soldier. It was one of the ranked attendants, the kind that stood in the semicircle with instruments, and it was looking at him with the flat, precise attention of the Veth when they were processing something they did not have an existing category for. How, it said, not a complete sentence. It seemed to be working out the grammar. How do you hold it together, the fear and the function, simultaneously? Merk thought about this. "You do the next thing," he said. "Whatever the next thing is, you do it as well as you can. You don't let the fear pick the next thing for you." He paused. "My mother taught me that, not in words, in the double shifts, in the food on the table." The attendant looked at him. "This is a human method," it said. "I think it might be the human method," Merk said. "I think it's the whole thing, actually. We're scared most of the time. We just keep doing the next thing anyway, and we carry each other." He stopped. He wasn't sure this would translate. "The people who taught us. The dead ones, the ones who are far away, we carry what they put in us. We bring it into rooms where it's never been before." The attendant was very still. "What happens," it said, "when the things they put in you are not enough?" Merk looked at it. He thought about Oravinen's hands pressing flat. He thought about Ryback. Whoever the historian's Ryback was in every generation, the person who calculated wrong, who chose survival over something larger, who stopped shaking by paying too high a price. "Then you figure out what the next right thing is with what you have," he said. "Even if it's not enough, even if it doesn't work, you do it anyway." He paused. "The working isn't always the point. Sometimes the point is just," he searched for it, "that you remained yourself while you did it." The attendant was silent for a long moment. "I do not understand this entirely," it said. "Neither do I," Merk said. "I'm 14. He walked down the corridor toward where his mother was waiting. Afterward, the historians would argue about what had actually happened on the Emperor's ship that day. The Veth records were precise, but their translation was imperfect, and the human accounts were colored by the particular quality of memory that attaches to the most frightening things. They grew cleaner and more certain in the retelling, the ambiguities sanded down, the hesitations forgotten. What was not disputed: 259 people from Karev Station received contingency reclassification. Approximately 60% of them eventually advanced through the labor track protocols over the following decade. Several became technical leads in VETH facilities. 4 were eventually freed under provisions of the Compact of 2214, which nobody had expected to exist in 2201 when Merk Salka stood in a cargo bay and decided to pay attention. What was also not disputed, the Verath Kethul was not terminated. It was, instead, reclassified from research specimen to protected status. The reasoning given in VETH administrative records was described, with characteristic precision, as follows. Specimen demonstrates previously unobserved behavioral capacity. Continued existence warranted for ongoing assessment. The name given to this assessment program in later records was a VETH term that translated imperfectly into human languages. The closest equivalent was something like, the study of things that surprised us. Merk Salka spent 11 years in the Emperor's household as a technical analyst before his work contributed, in ways the histories described at great length, and he described briefly when asked, to the treaty negotiations that reshaped human-VETH relations for the next century. He was 25 when the first draft was signed. He was not the oldest person in the room, or the most experienced, or the most decorated. He was, by general consensus, the most precise. When someone asked him, years later, what he had been thinking when he walked into the holding chamber with the Verath Kethul, he thought about it for a while before answering. I was thinking about thermal signatures, he said, and about what a thing actually is versus what you're afraid it is, and I was humming a song I didn't know the name of. Were you scared? He considered this with the same honesty he brought to all questions. Yes, he said, but scared doesn't mean wrong. He was asked, too, about the Emperor, about the moment when Svelkareth had asked him to hum the melody again, which had found its way into the histories as a kind of footnote, a curiosity at the edge of the larger story. What do you think it meant? The interviewer asked, the Emperor asking to hear it. Merk was quiet for a moment. I think, he said carefully, that there are things you can carry that you don't know you're carrying. Things that were put in you by people you loved, that live in you past their ending. He paused. And I think sometimes, if you're very still and very cold and moving very slowly, you can bring those things into a room where they've never been before. He was quiet again. And sometimes, he said, that's enough.